Sorry again for the confusion, but we had to change it again. It's going to be in the conference hall. The Zakat seminar is not the conference hall, sorry, in the prayer hall. It's going to be in here, inside here, the prayer hall, inside the main message. So the sisters are welcome to come inside, and we'll have the brothers on the other side. We'll set up chairs right now. Assalamu alaikum. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started, inshallah. So I'm not going to go through speaker bios. I think you all know Dr. Uthman Amarji and Dr. Muzammil Siddiqui very well. So this is the Zakat seminar. Inshallah, we're going to go for about an hour and a half, probably till like 7. Then we'll open the floor for a Q&A. If you do have any questions related to the subject that's being spoken about at that moment, you can always raise your hand, and inshallah, the speaker will call on you and answer your question. And yeah, pretty much it. Without further ado, we'll start with Dr. Muzammil.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الذين هم في صلاتهم خاشعون والذين هم عن اللغو معرضون والذين هم للزكاة فاعلون. Successful are the believers, those who are humble in their prayers, and those who avoid vain talks and vain deeds, and those who are the actors and those who do the acts of zakat. Zakat fa'ilun. So zakat is the third pillar of Islam, and unfortunately it's the very most neglected one. A lot of people pray and fast and go to Hajj again and again and Umrah. But when it comes to zakat, they don't pay much attention. Some people don't pay zakat, and some people pay, but they think, whatever I can, I will give. I mean, they don't keep an account of it. They don't do it as it's supposed to be done. But if they feel like giving, give it. They think this is their zakat. Just like somebody say, I want to pray 2 rakah for Zohar. So they pray 2 rakah. That will not Zohar, that will not be Zohar. So zakat is to be done as we are told to be done. That means this is a very restricted duty, very restricted charity. So we have the word sadaqah in Islam. Sadaqah is charity. And that you can give whatever you like, whenever you like, to whomsoever you want to give. You can give the sadaqah. But as far as zakat is concerned, zakat is obligation on those who have certain amount. And that amount reaches the nasab. And the 1 year has passed over it. And then they have to give on it certain percentage from that. And then this is the certain percentage has to be taken out, and then to whom you should give. It's not like anybody who would like to give, but to whom you should give. So all these things are specified. Specified funds, specified time, specified group of people to be given to them. So it is important to learn that. And one should not neglect it. Those who do not believe in zakat, they are kafir. They are disbelievers. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, the first Khalifa, when he found out that there are some people who are saying that we pray, we fast, but we will not give zakat. Or we will not give the zakat as was prescribed by Sharia. So he considered them as murtaddin, those who have gone away from Islam. They have rejected Islam. And then after that, so he sent an army to fight them. So it was recognized, and then from that time onward, always consider that it is an obligation. And those who consider this as an obligation, but they don't do it, they are sinners. They are committing haram. And the money that they have, that money itself can become haram. And Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu used to say, Umirtum bis salati wa zakati ma'an. You are commanded to do the salat and zakat together. There are 30 places in the Quran where salat and zakat come together. Aqimus salat wa atu zakah, again and again. He says, you are told to do both. So if those who do not pay zakat, then salat is not acceptable. Even salat is not acceptable. It's a very, very strong command. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us to do that. And Rasulullah warned those who do not give the zakat. Their money will become like something that is going to go around like a snake, going around their neck. A very poisonous snake that will be going around their neck on the day of judgment. May Allah save us from that. So it is very important to know the details, and our brother Dr. Osman Umarji has a full program, mashallah. I have seen that. I've been doing that for the last few years, mashallah. So I asked him to present this excellent program and show you what the salat means, and what kind of wealth on which the salat is, and how much, and to whom should be given. Barakallahu fiik. Yeah, you can have it.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. We begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah to accept from all of us during these blessed days. We ask Allah to allow us to maximize our ibadah during these last few sacred nights of Ramadan. Allah, Ameen. So inshallah, as Dr. Muzamma mentioned, this sacred act of worship, one of the huge pillars of our faith, is something people know very little about. And inshallah, over the next hour and a half, we'll try to cover both the spirit and the objectives of zakah and kind of historically how we think about it. And then we'll also speak about the nuts and the bolts, and we'll get into all the details and the juicy things you're probably wanting to ask about, including your retirement accounts, your business, so on and so forth. So I will begin by speaking first about the meanings, the objectives, and the spirit of zakah, and that will be for about maybe 25, 30 minutes, and then we'll move into the technical part of it afterwards. If you have questions, you may ask them at any time, but please make sure they're relevant to what we're speaking about, because most of the time you're getting ahead of yourself, and we will address those questions, inshallah. So zakah, linguistically, just so we know what it means, it literally means to grow or to increase or to become more purified or to become cleansed. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen this word that even at the most basic linguistic meaning has these noble kind of meanings behind it. Is that through the payment of zakah, right, our wealth becomes pure, right, our hearts become clean, right, our wealth and our iman, they grow. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ صَدَقَةً تُطَهِّرُهُمْ وَتُزَكِّيهِمْ بِهَا وَصَلِّ عَلَيْهِمْ إِنَّ صَلَاتَكَ سَكَنٌ لَهُمْ وَاللَّهُ سَمِيعٌ عَلِيمٌ. Inshallah, we'll get the presentation up and ready, but in the meantime, it's not urgent right now because there's no numbers on the screen. Allah says in Surah At-Tawbah, He's commanding the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to take from their wealth a charity by which you purify and you increase them and invoke Allah's blessings upon them. Indeed, your dua are a source of reassurance for them, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all hearing and all knowing. Now, interestingly, there's another word the Quran uses to speak about growth, but it's actually in reality the exact opposite, and that's the word riba. Where Allah, so the word riba and the word zakat linguistically both mean to grow, but only one of them has true growth in that sense, which is the act of zakah, whereas Allah says يَمْحَقَ اللَّهُ رِبَا وَيُرْبِ الصَّدَقَاتِ. So Allah destroys riba, which you think there is growth in, and He causes increase in zakah, which people often think there's a decrease in because my money is disappearing. And this is why the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he wanted to assure our hearts, because he knows the human being is predisposed to loving money. There's almost no topic that is as difficult to convince Muslims of rather than to pay their zakah properly because of the love for wealth. وَتُحِبُّونَ الْمَالَ حُبًّا جَمْعًا. That you love wealth with this abundance of love. And so it's incredibly important for us to understand, number one, soften our hearts, and understanding the perspective of the Quran and the promise of Allah and the promise of His Messenger when it comes to our payment and our sadaqat. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, He said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ اشْتَرَى مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ أَنفُسَهُمْ وَأَمْوَالَهُم بِأَنَّ لَهُمُ الْجَنَّةِ. That part of our transaction with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, part of our deal of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, being believers, is that Allah has purchased from us our life and our wealth. So many people, they're okay with some aspects of their life. Okay, I'll get up at 5 in the morning, right? I'll have suhoor, I won't eat, right? You know, I'll do some of these bodily acts. I'll pray even, but don't touch my money, right? That is a very common way that many people live, which is why the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, as-sadaqatu burhan. He said that charity, and charity in early language of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the Quran, sadaqah, it's confusing. It means zakah as well at times. So in the Quran, when Allah uses the word sadaqah, sometimes He refers to zakah, but we colloquially separate the two, of course. So here, the Prophet is saying is that charity is a proof. It's a proof of your iman. Which is why, again, if you're not willing to put your money where your mouth is, if you're not willing to put your money, right, on the line here, then one truly is not a believer. Which is why Abu Bakr fought them, radiyallahu anhu. That's why the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, right, had declared that there's no Islam for the one who doesn't pay their zakah. So, and then the Prophet gave us a beautiful words that should satisfy our hearts in case there's any worry about our money. He said, لا ينقص مال بصدقة فتصدقوا. He said, wealth does not decrease with charity, so give in charity. And here again is a test for the believers. Do you believe in the words of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ when he's telling you, if you give this charity, your wealth will not decrease. So give in charity. If one believes the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, then it becomes easy to give. And if one does not believe in the Messenger of Allah, then they have bigger issues in their zakah. They have issues of their iman as well. And so we move to understanding now technically or legally, what does this mean? Yes, it means to grow. It means to be purified and clean. But from a fiqhi, shara'i perspective, the word zakah, amongst all the definitions that I like, is the determined share of wealth prescribed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be distributed amongst deserving categories. And just like Dr. Muzammil mentioned, so we're talking about a technical calculation of your wealth that is to be given in a very particular way to a very particular group of people. So that is a difference between zakah and sadaqah, right? So we'll speak about three things in our talk. We'll speak about what is zakatable then. So there are assets that are liable to zakah. We'll talk about the conditions for that wealth to be paid upon. And then we'll talk about the people who are deserving of it. Amongst the ambitions of zakah, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala take a good deed, charity, and elevate it into something which is a pillar of one's faith, by which Islam itself cannot stand? It is because, and it's a purely financial ibadah. You write a check. And by writing a check, you fulfill a major aspect of your faith. Zakah has the ability to transform society. Amongst its ambitions, it is the primary welfare system of Islam. So of course, in our Western society, for the most part, that taxes are taken, and tax day is coming up in a few days. I did my taxes this weekend. And everyone gets that shock when you realize how much you pay in taxes. And a lot of those taxes are given to the poor through different mechanisms. Now in Islam, we have a different mechanism for that, which is predominantly zakah. So it's the first and foremost welfare system of Islam. And then of course we have awqaf, and we have endowments, and then we have voluntary contributions. But zakah is the first and foremost entity that is meant to absolve the needs of the society. Number two, it is part of the infrastructure of an Islamic economy. People often don't reflect over the fact that even during COVID, some of you got stimulus payments. Why was the government handing you free money? Anyone know? Is it because they love you? Right? No. It is because they realize that people, when you give them money, are going to spend that money. And they want to use that because they want to make the economy continue to go. If people say, well, we're in a pandemic, or people feel like they're strapped for cash, and they decide to start saving that money and putting it into their bank and not spending it, well, then that's bad for the businesses, it's bad for the economy of society. So when you give money to those who are in need, zakah actually facilitates the growth of an economy. Because those who are wealthy, who have surplus, it's going to sit in their bank account. But when you transfer that to the poor are going to use it because they're going to use it for rent and for the groceries, right, and for the kids' education and all their other fundamental needs of life. So it helps an economy grow. It also is predominantly for poverty alleviation. As we'll see in some coming examples, it is the first and foremost mechanism of alleviating the distress of those in poverty. In today's world, even in the United States, about 20% of youth are in poverty, about 13% of the population lives in poverty, and in the Muslim world, those numbers are sometimes as high as 68% of the society living in poverty. And then we have to sometimes ask ourselves, and people often look and say, well, why are Muslims not ahead? Why is Islam not thriving in the world? And Muslims, we say, well, really, it's not complicated. We don't practice Islam. So if we only cherry pick and say, okay, we'll do Salah, and we'll do Taraweeh, right, and we'll do Jum'ah, but we'll not have Islamic economics and finance and zakah being implemented, then don't be surprised when we don't see the fruits of Islam, right, in our lives. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is that it's actually spiritually a very important behavior because it creates harmony between two often opposing sides of society. In almost any society, what typically happens, especially in a capitalist society, is the wealthy look down on the poor as like sucking, the resources from society, and the poor despise the wealthy because they look at them as oppressive and doing everything they can to suck all the money out of their pockets. And that's the reality of society. We see that money continuously transfers in our governments, typically from those who are poor towards those who are rich through a lot of different mechanisms, amongst them interest-based things mainly. So what zakat does, as many scholars have written about, is it creates harmony actually between the rich and the poor, because now the poor, who are the have-nots, when they're getting it from the haves, imagine in your own community, you have poor people all around you, and we do here in Garden Grove or even the neighboring communities in Santa Ana, and you see Muslims go and give wealth to those communities. What are those poor people going to say when they're the recipients of zakah? First thing they're going to do is make dua and thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that wealth, and then they're going to thank Allah and praise those who've given them that wealth. Oh, Allah bless their wealth. Because we're getting some of that wealth. Allah increase them in their wealth because they'll be the recipients of that as well. So it creates harmony between, right, these two groups of people. So Umar ibn Khattab was narrated to have said, and some attribute it to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this idea behind investing. Because investing and zakah go hand in hand. Because people often think that, well, Islam is not about us investing our wealth. It just wants us to give charity. Actually, in Islam, there's a major incentive to invest, which I know a lot of us are investing, and a lot of zakah is then paid on those investments. Umar ibn Khattab he said, "Ittajiru fi amwal al-yatama." He said, invest the wealth of the orphans. So, كَيْ لَا تَأْكُلُهُ الزَّكَاةِ, so that it is not consumed by zakah. And this is important to understand because if we do not invest our money, then that money sits around in an account. It is not circulating around society, benefiting and growing in other ways, both for us as well as for the businesses that are out there. And then we have to pay a zakah on it. Now, it literally will decrease. Of course, spiritually, there's other things. But just to give you an example, if you had $100,000 of money in your bank account today, and you said, I'm going to leave it there and I'm not going to invest it in anything. After 1 year, you spend $2,500 in zakah, and now you have $97,500, and then that year passes and you spend 2.5%. After 5 years, you are down to $86,000 about, or by the 6th year. So you've lost a good chunk of your wealth by not investing it. So Islam is encouraging us actually to invest our money because that will make our money grow. And we know that for almost any good investment, a good investment is more than 2.5%. So your money is going to grow at higher rates, and then you're going to continue to pay a small percentage of that. So both sides win. You win when you invest, and then the society wins when you invest. And of course, those who are needy, they also benefit, right, when you invest. So this is an incentive for all of us to think hard about putting our money in the right places. This is not a talk to say, don't care about money at all and be detached from this dunya and be a zahid and just take all your money and give it away. No, work hard, invest your money, enjoy that money the way Allah has allowed you to, and then fulfill the rights of the deserving parties. Just to give you just some ideas about how our society is going in the opposite direction that it should, just in the last about 20 years, we see that those who are in the top 10% of wealth have continued to take a larger share, and those in the bottom 90% are now, just to give you the number here, so the screen is not shared yet, when the bottom 90% had about 1/3 of the wealth of the country in 1989, right? So 1/3 of all the assets of the country were owned by those in the bottom 90th percentile. By 2016, they now have less than 1/4, closer to about 20%. So you can see that systematically when you don't have a method of transferring money from the rich to the poor, in any society, you're going to find the rich are going to get richer and the poor are going to get poorer. And so this is something which is very problematic for us as believers, that when we have been obligated in the Quran in so many places, أَنْفِقُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَلَا تُلْقُوا بِأَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى التَّهْلُكَةِ, like spend in the cause of Allah and do not cause yourself destruction at your own hands. What this means is by not giving. When you withhold your money and you don't give it to the deserving parties, you're causing your own destruction in this regard. So we need to make sure that our hearts understand our obligation, right, to those who have a right over us. There's a famous story I'll mention about Umar ibn Khattab. It really, pulls my, every time I hear it, it shakes your heart. How he understood the burden on the shoulders of the ummah to care for those who are needy. One day he was making his rounds as the Khalifa, and he's walking on the outskirts of the city of Medina, and he sees a poor woman with her kids, and she's boiling a pot of water with some stones inside of it. And he goes and he sees these kids are like screaming and crying. So he asked the lady that what's wrong. She said that I have nothing to feed my kids and they're crying out of hunger. So I'm boiling this water with stones in it. They think that food is cooking. And perhaps I'm hoping that by the time this water boils off, they fall asleep. And so his heart, it felt bad. And then she said to him, she goes, and she didn't know who he was. It's just a man walking down the street to her. And she said, and I complained to Allah about the Khalifa Umar ibn Khattab. And so Umar was like, why are you complaining about Umar? And she said that it is the job of the ruler of a people to make sure the needs of the people are being met, because people have dignity and pride. They're not going to go and beg. And so he told her, okay, I'll come back with something for you. Don't let your kids fall asleep. And he was with Abbas radiallahu anhu during this incident. So he runs back, he gathers a huge sack of flour and some butter. He gives the butter jar to Abbas. He carries a huge sack of flour and he's walking for a long distance. And imagine carrying a huge sack of flour you get from Costco, right, on your shoulders. And Abbas is telling him as he sees the flour on his beard, on his shirt, on his hair, and he sees Umar struggling to carry it, that, can I carry this for you? And he says, Abbas, you cannot carry my burdens on the day of judgment. I'm not going to let you carry this flour now. He goes to that woman, he makes the fire, he cooks her a meal, he spoon feeds the kids, and then he tells her that I am related to Umar ibn Khattab. He didn't say he's Umar. And come tomorrow, and Umar will make sure he takes care of your needs. And he walks back and he tells Abbas, he said, I felt the weight of the mountains on my shoulders until I saw those kids smile and their stomachs being full. And the next day when the woman came, he begged her for forgiveness. And then when she forgave him, he then cut her a stipend from zakah that she could use in perpetuity for her kids. But really, the moral of the story is that every single one of us, even if we're not the Khalifa, even if we're not rulers of government, we have to feel this sense of concern for every single Muslim in our society to the best of our ability. And we don't have to look far. We literally don't. You can walk the streets of Garden Grove, you can walk the neighborhoods around us, and there are poor Muslims everywhere. It is not their job to come begging us for money. It is our job to seek them out and make sure that their needs are being met. And just to give us some hope, sobering hope, because the reality is very far from where we should be. There have been studies that have been done, because I just mentioned these really sad statistics that about some Muslim countries, you have half of the country in poverty, and in some countries up to about 68%. You say, how could we solve this? Well, we've actually done, some people, even from this community, Dr. Mundhir Qahaf, who many of you know, and other economists, have done large studies that looked at how much money has to go from the rich to the poor to get rid of poverty in a society. And in their studies, what they find is that you need about 4% of a GDP of a country, right? Their gross domestic product, all their rents, right? All their, all the products that they get. If that wealth transfers to the needy, then you should be able to get rid of those who are in poverty. So they said, okay, 4% is needed. Well, how much can zakat generate in any country? And country by country, they went through these countries, Pakistan, Malaysia, other countries, and they found that somewhere between 3 and about 7.5% of GDP transfer occurs if every Muslim in the country, or all the Muslims in a country, give their zakah. So you'd say, okay, worst case scenario, we get rid of about 75% of poverty. Best case scenario, there's absolutely no poverty, right? So it's a zakah in today's world, 2023, even with the lack of Islamic governance all over the place, could still eliminate poverty in our countries. Yet when you look to actually what is happening today in most Muslim countries, the percentage of GDP that's transferring to the poor is less than 1/3% in every country. So we said you can generate about 3.5 to 7%. What is actually going is less than 1/3%. And in some places, it's about 1/20%. So like in Egypt, it was about 1/20%. In Jordan, it was about 1/20%. In Pakistan, which was the best, it 0.3% was being transferred over. So clearly, something is wrong with the Muslim world in terms of how we think about this. As Dr. Muzammal mentioned, most people, even here, constantly we deal with it. Where you give a khutbah or you give a reminder about zakah, and people come who are I've given a seminar before to millionaires, just millionaires. And they said, I had no idea that I had to actually do something systematic. I just go to like a fundraiser in the community and I write a check for a few $1,000s and I thought that's my zakah. So they're worth millions of dollars and they wrote like a $5,000 check, and think about the delta between what they truly owed and what they've paid. And now they're worried, and these are good, righteous people. These are not bad people. But it was the ignorance that they had never been taught, that we have such a difference between what we should be and where we could be and actually where we're at. In Islamic history, we have phenomenal examples of how when Muslims implemented the Sharia properly and the zakah system properly, what happened. The most famous story we have is from the life of Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiallahu anhu, when he was sent by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as the wali, as the governor of Yemen. In his short stint of a few decades in Yemen, he sent back in the Khilafah of Umar, in 1 year, a third of the zakah assets, the second year, half of the zakah assets, and the third year, all of the zakah assets. In other words, in that short period of time, in the first year that he sent money back, he needed 2/3 of the zakah to eliminate poverty. Now a third was extra. In the second year, he needed half of the zakah. In the third year, 0. Meaning everyone paid zakah and there was no one to receive it. So he sent all of the zakah from Yemen back to Medina, which goes against what we typically do. And Umar didn't like this. He's like, I didn't send you as a tax collector, but he's like, there's no one poor here, so give it to those who are needy in other places in the ummah. Right? The second example came about 100 years, or about 75 years later, during the reign of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, the great-great-grandson of Umar ibn Khattab. In Egypt, during his reign, the same thing happened, where the governors wrote back saying that we have no one who's collecting the zakah. So what do we do with the zakah when there's no one to take it? And that's when he said that, well, you know what, buy slaves and free them with the zakah. He said build rest areas on the highways and even go up and down the streets yelling to people, are there any young people who want to get married so we can use the zakah to pay for their wedding? Right? Many people want to get married, we know today. And they're like, I don't have enough money yet, right? For the mahar, right? For the wedding, right? For the apartment. And imagine walking around and someone says, hey, you want to get married? Here you go. Here's a whole bunch of money. Give your wife a nice mahar. Have a nice walima. Go get a house for yourself, right? It'd be a great world to live in, right? And right now we have the opposite. In the Middle East, the average age of marriage has skyrocketed, predominantly because of the inability for young men to provide. And that, of course, is a moral disease it creates. So zakah can create so many solutions beyond simple financially, right? It actually reforms the entire society. In conclusion, in this first portion of the talk, for us to recognize that zakah is beneficial to the one who pays and the one who receives, and also for the wealth itself. It purifies that wealth. It provides barakah in that wealth. The dollar that has gone through the zakah process is worth more. When you have made your wealth, you said, I've got money, and I'm going to pay zakah on it. Now that money has barakah in it. It will go farther. And many people complain about this. SubhanAllah, you see it today. There's people who make so much money. And they say, I have nothing to show for it. I make $100,000, I make $200,000, but I just feel like I'm living check to check. And actually, the recent even numbers in America, I think 50% of those who make like $100,000 to $200,000 are living check to check. How do you make that much money that puts you in the top quartile of society that you're still living check to check? There's no barakah in that money. It is not being distributed the way it's supposed to be distributed. It's not being spent the way it's supposed to be spent, right? Allah has stripped it, right, of its ability to do so much. So think about every meal that you eat, how much it can nourish. Think about your car when you drive. Think about how much further it can go. Think about every dollar you spend when there is sadaqah and zakah that it's gone through. Then realize that that is going to go much farther in your life. And that's not just in the money, but then of course in your children's lives, right? In your own health, right? In all different things of life that you cannot even begin to fathom. You will see that barakah, inshaAllah. It is a means of forgiveness for the one who pays. It is raising one in rank, right? It cleans our heart. We, by our design, right, we have this love for wealth and we don't want to give it up. Yet when you go and you are in communities and you see the need that people have and you give it to them, that actually purifies your own heart and you recognize, you feel better about it. They call this a warm glow effect, right, in psychology research. That those who give are happier than those who don't give, even non-Muslims. Because they recognize that there's you're bringing khair into somebody's life. You realize that you're the upper hand, and you realize you can do good for somebody. And that benefits you in your own life, and it propels you to do more, to volunteer more, and to give more. It inculcates gratitude, right? The one who gives now is appreciative to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you're in that position to give. And it increases our rizq ultimately, right? For society, it alleviates the burden, right? And the stress on the elderly, right? In an ideal situation, if you had people who were old, they could be cut a check from zakah that would be a stipend for them, almost like today's version of Social Security, right? It helps the orphans, right? And the needy. It creates jobs. It eliminates debt, right? It protects the country itself from crime, right? It creates growth. It creates harmony. So at a macro level, it has tremendous benefits as well. And as Dr. Muzammil mentioned, there are tremendous reward for paying zakah and great punishments for not paying it. The Prophet said that when it came to zakah, he said that whoever gives in sadaqah as much as a date from halal earnings, and Allah only accepts that which is good, then Allah will accept that and increase it in size for the giver, just like one of you might rear a foal until it is the size of a mountain. Again, just to visualize that, imagine a baby horse. How big is a baby horse? Imagine it growing to the size of a mountain. And think about your dollar that you give. Think about how many times it is increased and how large it would be, like a mountain, right, of cash, essentially. When you stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is the extent of the good that will be in it. Allah will reward you to that extent and give you growth in this life and the next. And then he said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he says, whoever Allah has given zakah, wealth, but he doesn't pay his zakah, then his wealth will be turned into a venomous snake wrapped around his, with 2 black dots over his eyes. That snake will wind around the neck and bite his jaws and say, I am your wealth, I am your treasure. So that is what your money will tell you in the grave and on the day of judgment if you withhold that, right, from its deserving parties. Hamza, are we good? Let's see. So with that, inshallah, we'll move into the second part, which is to get into the nuts and the bolts and the technical aspects of it. So inshallah, our PowerPoint will work at this point, and we can, what's up? Is it working? Hamza, can you toggle it to another input? Okay. It's okay, we can continue until he has that ready. And I can always email this later. So inshallah, we want, and I'll stop now. Any questions kind of about the spirit or the objectives or the meanings of zakah? And please, Dr. Muzammil, jump in and add anything, please. It comes from the hadith. From the hadith. No.
Hadith mentions 1 out of 40.
And by the way, that is not for everything, so we'll figure out the rate. It changes depending on what asset we're speaking about. So now we're going to get into all these technical aspects of it. So now we understand what zakah is, we understand why we give it, we understand the reward for it and its potential. Now let's talk about how do we do it as individuals. Oh yes. It's a good question. I don't know if I have like a big economic answer for it, but just to contextualize it. So his question has to do with the difference between, in today's society, we are taxed on the income that we make, whereas in Islam, we're taxed on kind of the surplus savings that we have. So it doesn't matter if you make $100,000 and you spend $100,000 in the Islamic system, you have 0 savings, you don't owe anything, right? Whereas here, you would owe your taxes, right? And then you don't have to give anything after your taxes, right? It's a good question. What seems to be apparent is that like Christians, they tithe, and their tithing as well is on their income, which is 10% of their income. So tithe is a tenth, right? So if they make $100,000, Christians will then give $10,000 per year. They argue as well over pre-tax, post-tax, because they also don't want to give at times. But that's the liability that many Christian denominations that they have. From the Islamic perspective, one of the things that's important is that number one is cash that is sitting around actually doesn't facilitate the type of growth that we need in a society, right? So when you have millions of dollars sitting around, what do wealthy people do with it in this society? There's only really one mechanism that you can use, which is almost always going to be interest-based mechanisms. So if you have $1 billion of cash, the way that that money grows is when it is given out in loans, typically interest-bearing loans for the most part, credit cards, so on and so forth. And so it is typically this system promotes mechanisms of gaining cash that we would consider to be illicit, right? It doesn't have to be, it just happens to be how it happens in the modern capitalist system. With the wealth tax, essentially what it's doing is saying, look, you have your needs. If your needs and your lifestyle give you no surplus, then we don't ask you anything from that, right? If you have a surplus, then that surplus needs to go to those who don't. And that could be a much larger number if you have a massive surplus. So if you have a whole lot of money, your wealth tax is going to be much higher than income tax actually, right? And some people actually don't make a lot of annual income, but they have a lot of investments that make a lot of money. And so again, this is also a trick where many wealthy people, their income tax is actually very, very low because most of their wealth is coming from investments. And sometimes if they don't sell those investments, so if you have stocks and you have things that have not been realized, you can be making you can make millions of dollars a year and have no tax liability, right? So I don't know if I answered your question, but today's capitalist system makes sure that the wealthy pay the least. And their effective tax rates are typically lower than the middle class. That is well known, right? So the middle class are typically squeezed the most, and then the poor and the upper class are usually squeezed the least, wallahu alam, right? Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
40K.
Yes.
During the
I got it. We'll get into that question. I promise. We'll answer it soon, inshallah. Okay. So let's keep going for the sake of time because there's a lot here and you're going to ask a lot of questions. I know, without a doubt, right? So what we want to speak about now is, okay, so what do we pay zakat on? What is exempt? What is a nisab? What is a hawl? Who pays? Who do we pay to? On all these things, right? So let's start from the very top. So what is, and I use the word in English, zakatable, right? What is liable to paying zakat on? There's certain assets amongst the fundamental conditions of wealth that is liable to zakat is that it is liable to growth, right? So if some asset has a potential to grow and you fully own that money, and we'll talk about what fully own means as we move forward, then that is wealth that is typically considered liable to zakat on. So that can include cash, gold, silver, kind of accounts that you have that are accruing money. It can include agricultural produce that you're growing, produce on, fruits and vegetables. It can include livestock, right? Goats and sheep and buffaloes that are growing in size and having children. It can include real estate that is growing in its value, a business, and even jewelry. So all these things could be liable to zakah depending on the details we'll get into. So first, let's speak about some of the exceptions. So what do you not pay zakah on? So you do not have to pay zakah on anything that you personally use. So for instance, if you have any basic needs of life, your basic cars that you drive, your basic home or homes that you might live in, of course your clothing, your watch, all those, even if they're nice high-end possessions, right? So I'd say, okay, my clothes are maybe worth thousands of dollars. My car might be worth, my 2-3 cars, $100,000. Like my home is worth $1 million. None of these are liable to pay zakah on, right? Because these are things that you are using, they're for your personal life. There is no intention for growth behind them. They're actually probably depreciating anyway. So that's just a general rule. Things that you personally use are not liable, right, for zakat. The other thing that comes up often, and this, by the way, if you could have more than one home, so if you have your summer home and then you have your other home, as long as they're homes that you just generally live in. They're for you to live in and they're not like Airbnbs and they're not certain other types of business type of possessions. Same thing with cars. You might have your weekend car that you like to drive, right? Somebody has a nice, I like my Lamborghini on Saturdays and Sundays. Khalas. If you have it, Allah has blessed you with that, you don't have to pay zakat on it, right? As long as you're driving that and that's something which you use and it's not like I'm buying and selling cars. The third thing, which we'll get into the difference of opinion later, is over jewelry that is worn. So if sisters have jewelry, according to some of the madhahib, they don't have to pay on that. We'll get into that inshallah later on. But a point to make on this, because some people, like I mentioned, they make a lot of money, but they spend all their money on their cars, on their homes, on their clothes, on their watches, and at the end of the year, they have nothing to show for it. My mind is boggled. I speak to, alhamdulillah, very well-to-do, may Allah bless the wealth of these people, Muslims in Orange County, who make $200,000, $300,000 a year and say, I don't qualify to pay zakah. And when you ask them, it's yes, well, I eat out 3-4 times a week. I always have a new car every few months. My wife gets new furniture every few months, right? We paint our home every 6 months. We change our kitchen every year. It's like they live a lifestyle that is so extravagant that although they're technically excused from zakah, they fall into israf. They fall into this excessive use of wealth that is blameworthy in Islam. And that has its own accountability before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So even if one is not technically liable to pay, they might be held accountable for their extravagance, right, on the Day of Judgment. So be mindful. That's why Allah says in the Quran, Ya Bani Adam, خُذُوا زِينَتَكُمْ عِنْدَ كُلِّ مَسْجِدٍ وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا إِنَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُسْرِفِينَ. You know, the children of Adam, like, you can live a good life, right? Wear nice clothes, eat good food, drink things that you like, enjoy yourself. But do not be excessive, for Allah, right, does not love those, right, who are excessive, right, in what they purchase, right? So let's get into the two major terms we have to understand as we get into learning how to pay our zakah. And this is the terms of the word nisab and the word hawl. So the nisab is the Arabic word that refers to the threshold of what is considered to be what distinguishes the haves from the have-nots. So once you've hit this threshold, then you have now become someone who has been considered by Islamic law to have a good amount of wealth. And the nisab as well is different for different assets. So it's not like this fixed number. We'll talk about it in a minute. The second thing, in other words, one has to own this nisab before they become liable to pay zakah. And we said it depends on the asset we're speaking about. Number two is the word hawl. Hawl is a word that refers to the lunar year, which is important because it's not the Gregorian calendar or the solar year. So in Islamic law, when we are paying our zakah, we're calculating it based on the lunar calendar. So it's Ramadan to Ramadan or Shawwal to Shawwal. It's not January 1st, because that is a delta of about 10 days a year, which over time, right, accumulates. So we pay based on, and we calculate it based on the lunar year. So if that wealth has been there, that met the nisab for the hawl, the lunar year, then again, that is liable to zakah on certain assets. Other assets, we don't consider the hawl at all, like agriculture we'll get into. This is important because I know sometimes people think it's 2.5% for one lunar year, and that is what it is. That is on some wealth. Probably for most of you, that's all you need to know. But the reality is it goes beyond that. If one has farms, right, that have, I know many people do, right? They have in Central Valley, right? They have farms, they have apricots growing and pistachios and almonds and all these things. Or they have farms where they have goats and sheep. There's a completely different way to calculate this that we'll get into if that is your circumstance. So who pays zakah then? Who is the one liable to paying? Number one, Muslims are the ones who are liable to pay, according to the vast majority of the madhahib, right? That the kuffar are not mukhatab by the sharia here, so they are not asked to pay zakah. They have other things they have to pay, like they'll pay their jizya in an Islamic state if that's the case. So the Muslim is liable to paying zakah. The one who owns and possesses the nisab, so that's the second condition. So you have to, number one, be Muslim. Number two, own that nisab. When applicable, hold it for the period of time of a hawl. And then we talk about your debt, that you don't have more debt than you have assets, which sometimes happens. People have money saved, but their debt liabilities are very high. We'll talk about that. And the last thing is that age is not a requirement according to the majority of the madhahib. And the difference of opinion here comes from, is zakah due, is it something which is the right of, or is it on the person, or is it on the wealth? And the other madhahib say it's the right of the wealth. It's an obligation on the money that is being earned, which is important because many people, especially in today's age, we're saving for our kids' college, right? And even we want to put our kids' assets in other types of accounts. We want them to have investment accounts. And so many people will do this. They'll say, okay, I have my money, but I've got my 4 kids. They've got their college funds, they've got their investment funds, and they've got tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they're like, they don't have to pay any zakah on it, right? No, according to the majority of scholars, my personal preference is that it should be paid on everything, especially even if you follow the Hanafi school that is not, that doesn't mandate it on young children. It needs to come not from like a sinister niyyah, which many people, they want to evade zakah. So it's like, well, I have all this money in my account, let me put that money in my kid's account. So now I had a family one year came to me, they said, Sheikh, we need to apply for zakah. I'm shocked. And they're very well to do. I said, what happened? Was everything okay? So yeah, everything was okay, alhamdulillah, but we have put a lot of money into our kids, walima fund. They had $50,000 in each kid's walima fund. And so their $100,000 of savings went to zero. And so now they were like, we actually need zakah money, right? I was like, subhanAllah. Yes, exactly. In this case, the guardian has to pay, right, on behalf of the child, even if it's in their account and it's in their name, right? Yeah. Question? Go ahead. Yes. Yes. Yeah, the question if someone is not of sound intellect, right? Someone is disabled or something like that, but they have wealth. If that wealth is there, then the trustee of that individual has to pay, right, on behalf of that person, right? Yeah. Yes. So the question again was if somebody has a child or a dependent that is not intellectually capable of doing it, right? Someone has dementia, an aging parent, or a child who has a disability, but they have assets that belong to them, then they have to pay. It's just the person who's responsible for them would pay on their behalf. Right? Yeah. And that again comes from the view that zakah is an obligation on the money. It purifies the wealth itself. So it's not about the age of the person. And in today's world, you have children, can have all kinds of ways of making money. Like, even they have YouTube stars and all these things. Little kids play video games, make all kinds of money. They're all liable for paying their zakah, right? Yes? Yes, they should. I mean, of course, there's all kinds of legal things here to work out. But so the question again, I'll repeat it, was if a child or someone else has a lot of wealth and that money is liable for zakah, well then it should be invested as well, because or else that money could decrease, right? Yes, so the guardian should be responsible in that case for investing that money. And typically what happens is that even with young people who make money, the parent will put them with a financial advisor or something like that to put their money into the right safe assets, right? Wallahu alam. Right? So we'll continue. So the first category we're going to speak about is what applies to the vast majority of you, and we'll take the most time on this, which is the first zakatable asset is gold, silver, money, or assets sitting in accounts. I'm going to lump all these together because they're all treated the same way. Okay, gold, whether it's a golden bar or a golden coin or silver coins, or cash that you have, or money sitting in accounts. All of that is going to be treated as the same. So the nisab applies, and the hawl applies, and then there's a specific rate. So the nisab for all of this, gold, which is the original unit of wealth that was used, as the Prophet Muhammad said, right, was going to be 20 dinars. That was what it came out to at his time, which was equal to 85 grams of gold. And if we convert 85 grams, this is 22 karat gold, it comes out to 3 ounces. So anytime you want, you just can go to the Google and you type in price of gold, and it will tell you the price right now in real time by the ounce. And I checked it a few hours ago, and it was like $2,000 and I think $7.80 or something like that per ounce or something like that. I forgot. $2,007. So multiply it by 3 to get 3 ounces, and you get about $6,000, like 6,021 to be exact. In other words, if somebody had $6,000 that they owned, adding all their gold, adding all their silver, adding all their cash, adding all their accounts, then they have hit the nisab. Islam now considers you to be a person who has wealth. Okay? Now, the hawl starts. So today, imagine someone came to you and said, here is money, and that money you had crosses you over 6,000. Maybe it puts you at 7, 8, 9, 10, doesn't matter. As long as you have a minimum of 6, now you say, well, I'm not liable to pay zakah yet, but I've hit the nisab. Now what happens is, if one lunar year passes, and if today, is it 19th of Ramadan? 18th? Can't remember. 18th, right? So we're 18th of Ramadan. You say, next year, if 1 year passes, and I get now, right, to the 17th of Ramadan as well, 1 full year has passed, do I still have $6,000 that I own? Now there's a difference of opinion, but let's make your life easy. It doesn't matter about all of these fluctuations. So maybe you had $6,000 today, tomorrow it went to 10, and then the week later it went to 4, and then it went to 20. It just goes like this, right? Don't worry about it. Just look to see the day that I hit the nisab and the day that my hawl ends, do I still have the money, right? If that is the case, then you are liable to paying the zakah, right? That is the easiest way to do it for the most part, right? Now, of course, for most people, this is not an issue because most people are not teetering on the edge, right? People typically have like above, right? They'll have 20,000, 30,000, and then it'll dip between, but usually it doesn't drop below the nisab, right? So as long as it is still there, right, then you pay. If somebody is poor, right, and then you just get to that $6,000 amount, and then it is dropping, right? There's opinions that say no, because you no longer hit that threshold, then you can recalculate from the day that it goes up again. That is also permissible. So if you had $6,000 and you've hit that point, and then a month later you drop to $3,000, then some scholars say, well, you know what? When you get back to 6, start your hawl all over again, right? That's another opinion. That's fine completely as well, right? So again, make our life easy. You have $6,000 minimum. You have it a year later. Now you have to pay zakat. And the rate is 2.5% on your gold, silver, cash, or any assets. So what does this refer to? Savings accounts, checking accounts, Venmo accounts, PayPal accounts, retirement accounts, 401ks, stocks, and all kinds of other assets. So we'll unpack those in a minute now. But that's what's in this umbrella to speak about, okay? Stop for a minute. Any questions about the umbrella? Not the details of the accounts, because I will speak about them for like 30 minutes. Right. Yes?
If the money drops below the nisab, the minimum threshold, for a short time, then don't consider that. If for several few months that you don't have that money, that means you can start again counting your haul, your air. But if it is just for 10 days, 5 days, stocks goes up and down, so you can that you ignore that.
Yes. We'll get into all that. You're getting ahead of yourself. Okay, so let's now, so it's easy. Everyone's gold, easy. Silver, easy. Cash, no problem. I can take my Venmo, my PayPal, all these other, my cash in my pocket. I can put them on the table. I can figure out that I have this amount of money. No problem. But what about all these fancy accounts that exist in today's world? That have so many conditions and rules and pre-tax and post-tax and penalties and all these things. Let's go through some of these. And I'll speak about 4 briefly just to kind of simplify this. Are we good? Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Is it jewelry? Okay. But gold jewelry, not just like a bar of gold or like, okay. People have bars of gold. You can buy bars of gold anytime you want. And it'll stay in a place, and it's your bar of gold, and you have access to it whenever you want it, right? It's a good investment, right? So, if you've been given jewelry, we'll get to that in more detail later, but there's 2 positions, right? The Hanafi madhab mandates you have to pay on it, and we'll talk about how. The other 3 madhabs say you do not pay on it if it's personal jewelry that you're wearing. So when I get to the jewelry slide, we'll cover that, inshallah, in more detail. I was talking about gold. I meant like gold that like you invest in. It's coins, it's bullion, right? Or if you buy it like off the internet and it's stored somewhere for you. So other types of things people own that are assets. Stocks, and then I'll speak about an IRA account, a 401k, and a pension. Let's start with stocks. So stocks have different versions, right, that you have. So a stock, right, is, typically you have a company that is public and you want to purchase shares of that company, right? So you have shares of this particular stock, right? This could be in a mutual fund where you buy into the mutual fund. So you're not owning individual stocks, but you have, a portion of it depending on how the fund buys it. You could have RSUs that are called restricted stock units if you work for a company that gives you restricted stock units. You could have ESPP, employee stock purchase plans, if you work for a company that gives you a discount to buy stocks for your publicly traded company. Those are all different things. Let's talk about each. So if you have, the first 2 are easy. You have shares of a company. You have your own account, TD Ameritrade, Robinhood, any of these things out there, and you own those shares. There is 2 ways one could think about them. One way you could think about it is that you're an owner of this business because you own a portion of the business. And some scholars say you treat yourself like a business owner and you have to do a lot of fancy accounting to figure out what your liability is as the business owner. I personally don't hold this position because nobody thinks about themselves as a business owner when you buy shares. You think about yourself as simply owning a commodity, right? And this literally the stock market, the word stock market functionally understands that you're buying and selling commodities. So you could buy baseball cards, you could buy orange juice, you could buy, well, not pork bellies, but you could buy them, but it's not halal, right? Like you could buy all these commodities. Stocks are functionally the same to most people. They say, I want to buy something that I hope it goes up in value and then I want to sell it. So in this case, you treat it like you would treat any ordinary income. So if you have the stock and you've purchased it and you bought Apple or you bought Tesla or you bought Amazon and it goes into your account, whenever your due date is, whenever that haul has passed and now you're back to say, you know what, we're at 17th of Ramadan. Well, what is my stock, what is the account worth today? It's worth $10,000? Okay, it's worth $10,000, I pay on $10,000. Or it's gone down. I bought it at $5,000 and it's only worth $2,000. Well, you pay on $2,000. It doesn't matter if you don't have to realize it by selling it, right? And yes, there's a small fee for selling it, about whatever it is, $10 for some places. There might be capital gains. Unless you've realized any taxes, you don't subtract it. Because your niyyah is growth, and that money is growing. You're not trying to use it. It is doing what you want it to be doing, which is growing. So pay on that full amount, right? Mutual funds are the exact same thing. With RSUs, it's a little bit different. Anyone have RSUs? So is it worth talking about? Some? Okay, so restricted stock units is when your employer says, we're going to gift you stock as part of your salary. So you get your salary in dollars, and then we're going to give you on top of it, let's say, 1,000 shares, but over 4 years. So every year they give you 250. And usually it's every quarter they give you a portion of that. So today, I got a piece of paper from my employer that says, we're going to give you 1,000 RSUs over the next 4 years. Well, that 1,000 shares could be worth like thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars perhaps, right? Be worth a whole lot of money. You don't own that yet. So you don't pay anything on it. So I have it maybe today, 1 year passes, and I'm doing my zakat, and everybody says, oh, 250 of those RSUs are now in my account. They have now transferred over from the employer to the employee. Now I own 250. Now I only have to add 250 to my pool of assets. The 750, I still don't own it, right? Same thing, second year passes, well now you own 500. Third year, you own 750. Fourth year, now you own the full 1,000. So unless it's in your account and you have access to it to buy it or to sell it, if you don't have access to it, then it is not something which you're liable to pay on. So that's for RSUs. Yes? Sure, yes, we can cover options as well. People don't do options as much anymore. Okay. Still have options? Yeah, okay. So let's do ESPP first, then we'll do options. So ESPP is Employee Stock Purchase Plan. It's when your employer tells you you can buy the stock at a discounted price. So this is the same thing. You buying your stock at or your shares at a 15% discount, which is a perk to you. And as soon as you own them, right, that ends up becoming part of your account and you have to pay on the full value of it. So yes, you've only paid 85% of what it's actually worth, but you then owe on the full amount. And if you haven't yet met your strike date, that money has been accumulating in an account, you have to count that money in the account. So let's just say you've got $5,000 in the ESPP, but your strike date is after your zakah is due. You'd say, well, I've got $4,000 sitting around. It's ready to be invested. It's ready to be bought, but it is still something which you have to count in your zakah because you put money into that pool. It's just waiting for a certain date before you own the stock. Right now it's cash. It'll become a share at the end of the day, but you still have to add it into your assets. Stock options are when, is it a question on the same topic? Yeah, crypto would be just like anything else, right? Like treated like cash, whatever its equivalent worth is, you would just add that into your total assets. So if you have a Bitcoin, whatever that Bitcoin is worth, you add it to your total assets. The question had to do with cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Ethereum, all these things, you treat it like anything else. If it's got monetary value, whatever the market value is, that is what you add into your assets, right? So stock options are when your employer tells you, usually when you get hired, but not always, that if you join our company, then you have a right to buy these shares, but not today. You can buy them in a couple of years. Let's just say it's 4 years is often typical. But at the date, at the price of the stock today. So you say today I joined Amazon, I don't know what Amazon stock is worth. Let's say it's $1,000. They say, okay, today it's worth $1,000. But I don't own it yet. They've promised me I have the right to buy 1,000 shares. In 4 years, whenever this thing vests, now you have a right to buy it. You stop and you say, should I buy it or should I not buy it? If the stock has gone down and now the stock is worth $500, no one would ever buy it. It doesn't make any sense. It's called being underwater because the stock is worth less than you're being offered to buy it. So, of course, there's no zakah, there's nothing, you're not going to buy it. It's a bad idea. If the stock is worth more, but you don't have the money to buy it, maybe it's worth now $2,000 and you could double your money, but you don't have that kind of cash sitting around, you still haven't purchased it, right? So in this case, you're also not liable, even though you have a right to buy it. Right? When you buy it and you execute that transaction, now you own that stock, you owe, it comes now in ordinary income and you add it to your assets. So even though you've doubled your money, right, you're now liable to pay on the full amount as long as, again, whenever your hawl comes to an end. Good? All right. So some of the recommendations on stocks that some of the ulama give is that a lot of the stocks we invest in, there's always some element of riba and some things that may not be totally clean. It's good to try and give a portion of that away in sadaqah. That's like to purify from the impurities of it. And that's different than your zakah, right? That's just a recommendation that scholars often give. So we make sure our money is 100% pure, right? Let's move to the IRA accounts. So an IRA account, an individual retirement account, is an account that somebody opens on their own behalf that is not through an employer. So you typically can give, I think it's $6,000 now by the IRS. You can put $6,000 into this account. And that can be pre-tax as well if it's a traditional IRA. And then it can grow, right? You put it into the account, it might be growing over time. Again, the same idea. You own this money in full, you've put it into an account. That account might have restrictions, but you chose the restrictions because you liked the perks. It is doing what you want it to do, which is growing for your retirement. So you pay on the full amount every single year without deducting any penalties or taxes because you have not realized any taxes or penalties. When I get to the 401k, I'll mishmash these together a little bit, right? 401k is very, very similar. The difference is that it's the employer who's offering you this retirement account. And they're saying, look, we don't want to pay for your retirement. Because there used to be a time where employers used to pay for your retirement in pension funds. The government changed it, and they made this clause in the tax code 401, clause K, that says the employer now will incentivize, and the government will incentivize people to save money because people are bad at saving money. So the government said, if you save a certain amount of money, then we will not charge you taxes on that money now. And your employer may then contribute and match a certain amount. So maybe the employer says we're going to match 2.5% or 5% of that income up to a certain amount. So now you're like, oh great, I'm not paying taxes, so I'm reducing my tax liability. I was in this 25% bracket. Now I dropped to this like 15% bracket. That is great. My employer is adding in $5,000 a year, $10,000 a year, so that's even greater. Alhamdulillah. By all means, take advantage of it. But you have chosen to put your money in an account with these rules and restrictions that you cannot pull it out until 59 and a half, unless certain conditions are met. So, two opinions that exist. There's many, but two that I'll share with you. One is the opinion that I personally hold and many other ulama here in Southern California and nationally, which is you pay on the full amount that is vested every single year without subtracting taxes and penalties unless you realize those taxes and penalties. And I'll explain what that means in the next few minutes, right? And the fourth bucket is a pension, which is when your employer actually is taking money out of your paycheck, but you cannot access it until a certain time. Then you do not pay zakah on that until you actually receive your pension. Then it gets added to your ordinary income because of the restrictions on that account, right? So let me go into the 401k a bit. Pension. So you don't have to pay on your pension until you actually get it. So if you're young and you're paying into your pension, right, you don't have to pay on that because you don't have any access to that at all. It would be good if someone knows how much they're putting in to pay on that. That'd be a good thing to do. If you know every year I'm putting in some money into my pension, because that's money you're earmarking, but because you have zero access to that at all, right, then you don't have to pay on that because it's growing, of course, right, but there's no access whatsoever, even with penalties, any of these things. So traditionally, pensions are not liable to zakah. But if you know the amount you're putting in monthly, then you could add that, and that would be a good thing to do. Right? So 401k, let's be I'm going to separate between what is like what's good for your finances. Yes.
Taxes and penalty. Suppose somebody has $100,000 with IRA, and he want to pay the
Yes.
zakat on it.
Okay.
The will be 10%.
Penalty, 10%. Penalty, yeah.
And the penalty will be 10%, something like that. So now he basically owns 80,000. He's not 100,000.
Yes. Okay, so yeah, so two opinions, like I said. Position number one, you pay on full because you have chosen to put your money in an account with restrictions and with perks and with employer matching, and it is growing the full amount every single year. So if I had $100,000 in my 401k today, well, what is it doing for me? Is it doing what I want it to do? The employer might have put a whole lot in. It's been pre-taxed. It is growing every single year, and I want to use it when I retire. I don't want to use it right now. So position number one is you pay on the full amount. Position number two is that, well, even though it's $100,000 on paper, if you were to access that money, that $100,000 would actually not be $100,000. It would be what? $100,000, if you pulled it out immediately, it would become first $90,000 because the government taxes you 10%. That's a penalty for early withdrawal. The second thing that happens is that it's added to your ordinary income, which means whatever tax bracket you're in, that is the percentage you would pay on that $90,000. It might be 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%. So assuming it was 40%, right? Now you're down to like $55,000 essentially, right? So some scholars say you can pay on that $55,000. I personally don't think that makes sense because of what I mentioned to you. Number one is you did not want to pull the money out. You did not pull it out. It's all hypothetical. And you're making money every year on $100,000. So how are you paying zakat on $55,000 when you actually are, your money is $100,000, $110,000, $120,000, $130,000? It continuously is growing. So that's my position. There's a second position that exists. If one wants to follow that position, they're allowed to. AMJA gives that position and many others. I don't know, what is your opinion? So if you want to share yours. Sometimes a difference of opinion, I always say, look, Allah's going to take care of your wealth if you do everything as well as you can, right? Right? Yeah. Yes, AMJA does, exactly. Yeah, I don't know about the other, not all councils, some do, yes. Yes. Got it. I'm going to cover it right now. Get you. You're always ahead of me. Okay, so let's quickly understand the difference between Roth and traditional accounts because they have major zakah differences. Full disclaimer, I am not speaking as a financial advisor. I am speaking as a zakat advisor. Okay? One might be good for your bottom line. One might be good in the dunya. One might be good for, you decide. Okay? So a traditional 401k or a traditional IRA is pre-tax, meaning that that income that you've earmarked into these accounts gets deducted from what the government will tax you on. So again, whatever bracket you're in, you reduce your liability, which can make you pay less taxes. So typically the recommendation, typical capitalist recommendation, is if you're in a very high tax bracket now, put your money into a traditional 401k or a Roth, because now you drop in brackets. They say if you're in a very low bracket now, then put your money into a Roth account because you're going to pay a very low tax rate on it, and then you'll never pay tax in the future. So just to understand the difference. So with the traditional 401k, this is very important because people talk about penalties and taxes. There's some stuff in here people don't understand. So the first thing is that it's pre-tax, like I mentioned. Number two, you cannot pull it out before 59.5 without certain restrictions, and we'll talk about those. So what can you do? Imagine someone had money in their 401k, and they're like, well, I need to pay my zakat on, and I don't have any cash. Well, you don't need to actually take a penalty, and you don't actually have to pay your taxes on that. What you actually, taxes you might have to pay on it. What you can do, no, you don't actually. You can pull a loan from your 401k for up to $50,000, or that's the maximum you can do. So if somebody has less than $2 million in their 401k, then if you have $2 million and your zakat is 50,000 on this, right? Then you can take the full loan out. So you can literally go to yourself, go to your 401k, say, I'm giving myself a loan. And that loan is on interest, by the way, which doesn't mean anything. You're paying yourself interest, which is not interest in Islam. It's only interest to the government because they want to discourage you from borrowing money. They say, well, you got to pay yourself back interest in order to discourage you from making that loan. Because like, man, I can't make up that extra money. So they want to discourage you. So that's okay. It's halal to take a loan from your 401k to pay off your zakah, and you will not incur a penalty, and you're totally good to go. That's number one. Number two is that you don't know your tax liability. So today I have a 401k and it's growing, and I haven't paid a penny of taxes. Well, what tax am I going to pay on it? Well, it depends on what you do when you retire. If you're 60 years old and you say, you know what? I want to buy myself my dream home. And I'm going to pull out my entire 401k, that's $2 million, and buy my dream home. If you pull out $2 million, you're going to get taxed 40%. Okay? Because you're pulling out a lot of money. If you say, I'm only going to pull out a few $1,000s a month, every month, just a certain amount, you might pay practically zero in taxes. Super tiny amount. So you might have a liability that's practically zero, and you might have a liability that's up to 40. It's unknown. So my recommendation from a zakah perspective, not a finance perspective, is when you put your money in Roth accounts, you know you're never overpaying. Because you've already paid taxes to the government, and you never pay tax in the future, so what you pay in zakah is exactly what you owe in zakah, and there's no ambiguity about overpaying or underpaying. With the traditional, you might overpay, but inshallah, that is rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's the difference again between Roth and traditional. My encouragement is Roth for simplicity of zakah. But again, if you're in a higher bracket now, you might choose the traditional for the tax benefits. But you just know you'll end up paying likely more in zakah. But most people are savvy. When they retire, they roll things over. They do all kinds of other things. So again, this whole thing of people saying 40% taxes, they're using the extreme scenario typically to get out of paying some zakah. So I discourage that. But again, to each their own. Wallahu alam, right? Questions now on this topic? Because I'm sure people have many. Yes? Wa alaikum salam. Okay. Jazakallah khair. Yep. Okay. Yeah, Jazakallah khair. Yes, yes. Great question. I will answer that. It's coming up soon. So her question has to do with, again, you have assets that you also have upcoming expenses, like rent or car payments or college tuition or all these things that you owe. And then you also have potential taxes you have to pay. So then how do you, again, this goes down to, you have all your assets, and we need to subtract liabilities. And there's a procedure for that. So we'll cover that, inshallah, in the coming slides. Okay? Good question, though. Okay, so now I want to actually address when you should deduct from your 401k if you follow the position that I articulated, which is you pay on full. If you follow the second opinion, then this is not relevant for you because you're already deducting. If you actually realize those penalties and taxes is when you deduct them from your worth. What do I mean by that? So imagine somebody had $2 million plus in their 401k. Now they could not take out, their zakah liability is greater than even the loan they could take out, $50,000. And they did not have enough cash on hand. They did not have other stocks or cash in a checking account to say I can write a $50,000 check. Or even if you had less, like I have $100,000, but all my money is locked up in my 401k or my house, I have nothing liquid. So okay, let's take that scenario. Somebody had $100,000. How much do they owe in their zakah? Not hard, 2.5%, you owe $2,500. But I don't have the money. So what do I have to do? I have to dip into my 401k in order to pay it. But if I dip into my 401k, and assuming, let's just leave the penalties out for a minute, leave the loan out for a minute. You say, okay, if I pulled out $2,500, well, I'm going to have to pay a tax on it and a penalty on it. How much? Well, you're not pulling out $100,000. Keep that in mind. You're only pulling out what you need to pay your zakah. So let's just say I say I'm going to pull out $3,000 because it's going to be penalized and taxed. If I pulled out $3,000, I owe $2,500, right? That's what I owed when I did my numbers. But if I pull $2,500, I'm going to have a penalty on it, and it's going to go below. So let's just say I pull out $3,000. Well, what happens? The government says you took it out early, pay us 10%. So you owe the government now $300. Now you have $2,700. Then the government said, well, you now took out $3,000 that got put into your ordinary income. You pay every year 20% in your tax, that's your bracket. So I need 20% tax on this. That's $540, right? So now you said, okay, I had $100,000 I owed on, but now I've actually lost $300 plus $540, so I've lost $740. So now I actually owe from $100,000 minus $740. Now I owe, or is it, yeah, $840, sorry. I owe $99,160. Now is my zakat liability. So how much do you owe? $2,479. So all that hard work, and it was a $21 difference, right, in your zakat. So I want people to understand that people think, oh my God, the penalty, the taxes is so hard. Okay, you paid $840 in taxes and penalties, but the difference in your zakat was $21. So don't dip into your 401k unnecessarily. Just write a check, save money on the side, strategically plan that as my 401k grows, and may Allah increase all of you in your wealth. I hope, it's good when we have these problems. It means that Allah is blessing us, right? But plan for it. You know what? Today I only have $10,000 in my 401k. That's not a big deal. I can have, $250 on the side of my account. But what happens when it gets larger and larger? Either I have to reduce my contributions, or I have to save in other ways. Maybe I got to cut back on or I need to make sure I can sell off my stocks. Prepare yourself to be in a situation so you don't come and say, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. Right? I don't want to liquidate it, and I don't want to do all these things. Just prepare. So you're all savvy enough to figure out how much you have to save to say, I'm going to put in my checking account, extra $100 a month or $100 a week in order to make sure that my zakat can be paid outside of incurring any of these costs or these other penalties. So that's when you should deduct if you follow the first opinion, only when you actually dip into it, right? Wallahu a'lam. Questions about that? Yes? Good question. So if you have not sold the shares, again, it's in your account, you take the full value because that's what it's growing. The full value is growing every day. If you sold it and now you've realized taxes, capital gains taxes or any other taxes, then those are to be deducted because no longer, if the stock was worth $1,000, but after taxes, it's now worth $800, well, now you only pay on $800. So you only deduct if you realize. Right? And again, the reason is, again, because the full amount is growing when you don't sell them. It's and it's doing what you want it to do. It is growing in the ways that you are, it matches your intention essentially, right? Okay, so let's move fast. I know we have to go because of time. So, I'm recommending Roth for simplicity for zakah. Yes. It makes your zakah calculations 100% accurate. You never worry about overpaying one bit. Not necessarily. So again, with Roth, you are paying, if you make a whole lot of money and you're in a high bracket, then the Roth, you're going to pay higher taxes most likely. But for anyone who's not in a very high bracket, then being in a Roth is actually just fine because you're paying very low taxes, right? And again, so the difference is that with the Roth, if I paid 10% in taxes already up front, I never pay it again. So my zakah that I paid on the $100,000 is exactly what it's supposed to be. With the traditional, 30 years later when you withdraw, you have no idea what percentage you will end up paying. So you might end up overpaying, you might not overpaying. So it just removes any ambiguity, right? So again, you decide what you think is best for your finances as well as simplicity for your zakah, right? It's okay either way, yes. No, of course not. No. It's great, right? And you get ajr for all that, right? So, yeah. She says, is there any harm in overpaying? No, it is a tremendously good deed, right? And it's good sometimes to like buffer. Sometimes like people like calculate to the dollar, but then you forget, oh, I forgot about my Venmo account. It had $1,000 in. Oh, I forgot my PayPal account. Or I forgot about this account or that account. They're little account. Just look. So this is important. This is ibadah. Everyone has to have a spreadsheet. You have to have a spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet will say every single account that you have on it. Just do it today. Go home and write down, I have a PayPal account, I have a Venmo account, I have a checking account, I have this TD Ameritrade account, I have this 401k account, I have whatever account, just list them all out. And then put the dollar amount that exists, and then say, okay, I'm above the nisab. Okay, you know what? I haven't paid zakat before. Okay, you know what? Let me start now. Okay, and if you've had it for a year, then you should pay right away. But then follow this every single year, so you don't have this ambiguity. Because I cannot remember, oh my God, I have this Charles Schwab account that I put for my daughter and I completely forgot about it. It's been sitting there for years. Or I forgot about this random account that I haven't touched. It was like my retirement account from like a university that I taught at 10 years ago. It's just sitting there and you forget. So you have to have everything delineated and you put the date on it because no one remembers the nisab either. No one remembers the date that their zakat is due. I have to open my spreadsheet to realize that I forgot now, it's like something in Sha'ban, right? That's the only way I remember. So if you don't document this stuff, you are responsible at the end of the day. Yes. Yeah, 7-ish, and then there'll be questions for those who are willing to stay after. Yes. Well, you've already received it. So you've received it, it's just sitting in an account. So you pay on it now, either the opinion, either in full or with some deductions. And when you receive it, when you withdraw from it, you treat it again like you pay on it the full amount because you own it, right? Yes. Interest in what account? There shouldn't be interest in just a 401k, but is it in? Not necessarily, unless there's an interest thing built into it. So you might have bonds in your 401k. People also need to look at their 401ks and see if it's halal in the first place. Not all 401ks are halal because there's a lot of things that are impermissible within them. So part of being a good Muslim is seeing, hey, does this have the assets that a Muslim should be investing in? If they're investing in all kinds of haram companies, you might want to rethink that. Or if you end up doing it, you have to purify a lot of your wealth to get rid of that impure wealth. If there's interest income, one has to get rid of that. Like you have to literally donate it, and there's no ajr for that either, right? And so, yeah, just calculate it. If you have interest, donate it off, and like there's no sadaqah there, right? Yeah. Find some random good cause and just get rid of it, right? Yeah. Try not to have it. You can make phone calls and get this stuff taken off of your bank accounts. So you can call your bank and say, I don't want interest on it, and they will take it off. It's a little bit of work, but you can do it. So let's move fast for time, and then we'll give that. So number 2, really fast. We're at jewelry now. So very, very quick. 2 major positions on jewelry. One, again, it's liable to nisab, right? This like goes into your regular assets if you are from the Hanafi school of thought. Well, let me slow down a bit. Let's talk about jewelry in general. 2 types of jewelry. There's jewelry that is considered to be zakatable by everybody, and then some scholars say there's no zakat due on other types of jewelry. So if you have a business and you are selling jewelry, gold, silver, rings, anything of that sort, and you have merchandise, you have an inventory, or you buy it because you're trying to buy it so it grows in value. So again, it's stored for financial purposes. The goal is appreciation. And at the end of the day, if the intention is to make money on it, then you have to pay zakat on it. Again, so I said, there's this really nice ring on the market. It's worth $5,000 now. If I buy it, it's going to be worth $10,000 in a few years. I'd never want to wear it. In fact, I think it's ugly. It's just going to sit in my safe deposit box. That is zakatable because it is a growth asset at this point, right? Now, when there's no zakat due, is for the 3 madhabs, the Malikis, the Shafi'is, and the Hanbalis, if it's personal jewelry that a sister owns, right? So a sister has, or a man owns, but they can't have gold, right? So if there's a gold ring or necklaces or earrings that's gold or silver, because they're personal possessions that are being worn and used and no intention of selling, they're going to be family heirlooms perhaps, but the niyyah is not to make money. I liked it, I got it as a gift, I got it for my wedding. There's no zakat due according to those 3 madhahib. The Hanafis say that you still have to pay zakat on it. How you would do it is you have to weigh the weight of the gold, right? And you pay on the weight of the gold. So whatever many ounces or grams that it is, right? You add that and you would pay. Now, if you don't want to break off a piece of the gold and donate it, so ideally you have some cash on the side. that you would pay on, right? That's the Hanafi position, right? So if you're Hanafi and you want to follow that madhab, by all means, pay on your jewelry. If you are not, you don't have to pay because there's no intention of growth whatsoever. Right? Number 3, business assets. So if one has a business, again, what is counted in your zakah is if you have any inventory in your warehouse or merchandise out on your floor, if you own raw materials for production, if you have wood, you have metal, any of those things, their market value, right, is what you calculate into your zakatable assets. And of course, any cash sitting in your business account, all that is liable to zakah. What is not liable for zakah is if you have any sort of business fixed assets. You've bought a chandelier in your business, in your storefront, or a building even for that reason, right, that the business is happening out of. You have any sort of other machinery and furniture, rental items, none of that is zakatable. And even any debt that is never, like dead debt, essentially. You have customers who've owed you money who've never paid it off. That is not liable, right, for zakat as well. So that's for business really fast. I'm going to skip real estate for time right now. We can ask in the Q&A. Anyone here own livestock or farms? Okay, then I'm not going to go into the details. Just if you're curious, if you owned 30 cows or buffaloes, you would have to donate one one-year-old. And if you owned 40 sheep or goats, you have to give one of those as well, right? And there's all kinds of rules about what they have to look like and their size and so on and so forth. For agricultural produce, just so we're clear, I want to share with you the differences of opinion or show you how it's different than money. Agricultural produce has a different nisab. It's no longer going to be $6,000 worth. It's 600 kilograms worth. So if you have a farm and that farm has 600 kilograms of oats and wheats and barley or apples or apricots or nuts or one of these things, that is the nisab. There's also no hawl. No one's going to say, let me hold on to my 600 kilograms of apples for a year. Right? Unless they're Cosmic Crisp, they will die. Right? Because they've been bred to last longer. So you cannot. You have to on the day of harvest. Right? That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran. Right? He says, وَآتُوا حَقَّهُ يَوْمَ حَصَادِهِ. Give its right on the day that it's due. So in a traditional Islamic society, there would be collectors who would be going around doing these things. But if you have that farm, when you harvest, you weigh it. If it's 600 kilograms, you have to pay on it. And what do you pay? It's not 2.5%. If it is naturally irrigated, meaning you don't have any water systems, you're not paying water bills, you don't have sprinkler systems, you pay 10% because you've gotten this stuff practically right for free. Of course, there's some investment, but you pay a higher rate. If you're paying for irrigation, then the rate is 5%. So again, just to show you an example of the nisab is different and the hawl doesn't apply and the rate is different, right? So that's agriculture. Now we get into who is eligible to receive zakah. This is obviously a touchy subject. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah At-Tawbah, إِنَّمَا الصَّدَقَاتُ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ وَالْمَسَاكِينَ وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا وَالْمُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبُهُمْ وَفِي الرِّقَابِ وَالْغَارِمِينَ وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَابْنِ السَّبِيلِ فَرِيضَةً مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَاللَّهُ عَلِيمٌ حَكِيمٌ. Allah outlines for us 8 different groups who deserve zakah. He says, Allah says zakah is only for the poor, the needy, those employed to collect it, those whose hearts are inclined, for freeing captives or slaves, for those in debt, for the causes of Allah, for the stranded traveler. These are all obligations imposed by Allah, and Allah is all-knowing and all-wise. So let's go through these 8 quickly so you understand. Because in America especially, this is where I go on my rant for those who know me, every single organization in America claims to be zakat eligible, almost. 99% of organizations say, give us your zakah. Your job is to be an informed Muslim and to give it where you think it should go, not to say, well, someone said I can give it to them. Okay. So number 1, the clear hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the verse of the Quran is that zakah is predominantly for the poor. That's what the Prophet told Mu'adh ibn Jabal. He said that, tell them, إِنَّ اللَّهَ افْتَرَضَ عَلَىٰ أَغْنِيَائِهِمْ صَدَقَةً عَلَيْهِمْ صَدَقَةً تُؤْخَذُ مِنْ أَغْنِيَائِهِمْ تُرَدُّ فِي فُقَرَائِهِمْ. That it is a wealth to be taken from the rich and given to the poor. That is the default of what zakah is about. Now, of course, there's other categories, but we'll get into it. But all of them have, at the core of it, this underlying individual human need. So the poor, who is the poor? The poor is the one who has practically nothing, right? You could say the one who's maybe in like dire poverty, like really below like a threshold of even basic needs being met. They're the most deserving of zakah. Number 2, the needy. Someone who has maybe the basics of life. Okay, you know what? I have a home I can live in. I can afford my rent, but I can't afford groceries. I can't afford my kids' to have anything, proper clothing, right? We're lacking in fundamental things. So they're still needy. Number 3 is employees of zakat collection. And this historically was when the Muslim ummah had a khilafah, and there would be zakat employees who would go out to farms, because they're going to go to the farms and say, you've got sheep, and you've got cows, and you have buffaloes, and you have fruits, and you have all these things. We will help you calculate, collect, and transport it, right? It's a lot of work to do this if you have a farm. So, when it came to individual money, people would give their individual money. No one is going into bank accounts and checking. But the state administered this, and so those who collect, the state collects the zakah, and then from that collection would give salaries to those zakat collectors. Now, today, this presents itself in an interesting way, where imagine I was to tell you all, you know what, I just gave this wonderful talk for you all on zakah. Now you know how to give zakah. You know what, me and Dr. Muzammil, we know lots of poor people. So please give us your zakah money. We will go and give it to the poor, but we charge you 20%. How would you guys feel? You wouldn't like it, right? This is essentially what happens when relief organizations get put up and if they take overhead from zakah, is your dollar is not getting to the poor in totality, a portion is getting there. So the recommendation is try your best to give your zakah to entities that promise 100% distribution. And that means we need to give sadaqah to these organizations so their overhead can be covered by sadaqah. Those salaries and all the other expenses, inshallah, if we can cover them by sadaqah, then they can give 100% of our money to the needy. We don't want that we give $1 and in some cases 60% or 50% or 30% actually reach the poor. So ideally in the circumstance, when I volunteer to give zakah to somebody, I should not skim money off the top. So that's up to individuals to decide how to give. Try and look for 100% zakah organizations. Yes? Yes? We'll get into all that, yes. I'm going to go very fast for time, and if I don't cover it, then ask the question. Only if it's related to what we're speaking about. So I know it's 7. For those who need to get home for iftar, by all means, don't feel like you need to be here. If those are going to stay for maghrib, then we can keep going for another 15 minutes. Is that? Yeah. 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 Exactly. So let's go through all this. So are they serving the poor? Are they giving money to the poor? No. Are they giving money to the needy? No. Number 3, are they employees of zakat collection administered by a state? No. Number 4, those mu'allafati qulubuhum, those whose hearts aren't inclined. This has been understood traditionally in a couple of ways. One, it was understood again by the government to take money, like the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the early generations, where even they might give it politically to certain parties to prevent harm. Let's say, like, there's parties out there who want to harm the Muslims. We might give them from our zakat assets to help the affairs of the Muslims, prevent like wars and other things, right? Or today, some people use it for people who are close to converting to Islam, but again, there's certain reasons why they don't want to convert, right? And there's benefits, like for instance, someone might get cut off from their family, so they'll have no financial assets, right? So these fears. So giving money again to people who are close to converting. So again, whose hearts are meant to be softened or inclined. Typically done by the state, but it can be done today in some limited circumstances. Freeing slaves and captives. So, yes, of course. No, Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah, Dr. Muzammil. I'll reward you. We'll see you tonight, inshallah. Those freeing slaves and captives. So again, slaves, if they were to be bought and freed, would be great. POWs, right? If there's prisoners of war, that we needed zakah money to free them. Or political prisoners as well. Those all fall under slaves and captives. Number 5, those who are in debt. غَارِمِينَ عَلَيْهَا. This refers to those people who are genuinely in debt. You have people who, who are generally, they were needy to begin with. They had to take a loan. Something went south. They were unable to pay back their loan. Now they're in debt. They can't even pay back their debt. So zakah could be used to pay back, right, their debt in this case. This does not apply. Well, I bought a home, right? Alhamdulillah. I got an $8,000 a month mortgage with these 7% interest rates. I need zakah to pay my mortgage off, right? No, of course not, right? This is a genuine, unable to pay back, people who are stuck and crippled in debt, right? Now we get to your question, sister, which is the dicey question of the day, always, which is fi sabilillah, which literally means, right, in the causes or the ways of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This has been understood historically in certain ways, and in modern ways, some loosening, to say the least. So, fi sabilillah was understood at the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the early generations to refer to jihad, meaning it was used to fund military expeditions. Someone wants to go and fight, and they need weapons, they need a horse, they need access to things, they need food to go on their journey and to fight. So the government would say, here's money to go and fight jihad. The soldier is getting money for his needs to fight. Then some scholars like the Hanbalis came along and said, well, Hajj is literally a path to Allah. So we could use it for poor people who want to make Hajj as an example. Right? Now today, some fiqh councils have really opened this up and they kind of say, well, fi sabilillah means good causes. So any good cause, essentially, we can pay zakat on. And that's where all these organizations nationally come to you and say, give us your zakat money because we're zakat eligible. What do? I do advocacy work. I do political work, right? I do dawah, right? I do all these things. And really the truth of the matter is that this is a gross, in my opinion, violation of the spirit of zakat, because what it ends up doing, it ends up happening where like wealthy Muslims give their zakat to like middle class and upper class like Muslim organizations that are serving actually those parties for the most part, right? So like when you give your money to like, and here's some rules. You are not supposed to be a beneficiary of your own zakat. So when you give money to a cause that you love, that you're benefiting from, that's not something which you're supposed to give zakat to, right? So if I want to give my money to CARE, because I love the work that CARE does. Well, if CARE is doing political advocacy and I like their political advocacy work and I'm a benefit of their political advocacy work or anything else, that's not a zakat eligible entity, right, in that case. Now, if they're serving the poor, the needy in that circumstance, okay, fine, right? Or the same thing, I love this dawah organization. They do wonderful dawah work. I watch their lectures, I read their, their research, or whatever it might be. I attend their classes and they're asking for zakat. It's like, you are benefiting from that. This is a dawah organization. Give them your sadaqah, right? So please be mindful about who you give your zakat to. Give it to these parties that Allah has clearly delineated. Look, let's make it easy. If Allah wanted zakat to be for any good cause, He would have said, "Innama sadaqatu fi sabilillah," and the ayah would have been done. He would have said zakat is for the sake of good causes. Why did Allah make 8 different categories when one category includes all of them? It kind of goes against the spirit of how Allah speaks in the Quran. It would be like having unnecessary words that have no meaning behind it, right? So for us to really, no, fi sabilillah is a group and that is bounded in a certain way. Let's not violate, right, how that was understood. Just because non-profits say, well, the Muslims don't want to give us, let's just tap into their zakat pockets, essentially, right? The last category was a traveler who's stranded. This is someone who might even have wealth, but they have no access to it. So let's just say that you're traveling another side of the world, or someone is visiting America, and perhaps they're wealthy. They lose their wallet, they lose their passport, they cannot access their accounts. They could actually collect zakat in that case, right? Because they're a stranded traveler, and the zakat would be an acceptable use for them, of course. These are the 8 categories. Don't give to people outside of these 8 categories. If you want to give to those outside groups, give them your sadaqah, and they deserve your sadaqah. Please give to the dawah, advocacy, all these other wonderful causes. The masjid is not zakat eligible, right? So you are not allowed to build your masjid with zakat. You're not allowed to, benefit, right, from the services that you're paying for. So give them your sadaqah, right? Wallahu a'lam. All right, some other priorities, preferences, sister, your question. So number 1, give it locally if there is a need. This is the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and all the madahib. Zakat should be given locally. You make your money locally, you live locally, give it to the people who are poor in your communities. So the poor Muslims of Orange County have more right to your zakat than the poor Muslims of other parts of the world. That's the first rule. Number 2, you can give some of your zakat to other places, but let it be a smaller portion of it, okay? Because give them your sadaqah, right? Palestine, Iraq, Pakistan, give them your sadaqat, right? Number 2, giving it to family that is a priority, including your brothers and sisters, your aunts and your uncles and your cousins, all those. But you cannot give it to family that either gave birth to you or you gave birth to them. So you don't give it to your mom and dad, and you don't give it to your brother and your sister, or your grandmother and your grandpa, or even your wife you cannot give to, although a wife can actually give to her husband. It's a separate situation, because she's not responsible, right? He's responsible. So zakat is the right of the poor. They should be given preference. And give it immediately. Do not delay, because your zakat is something which you're a guarantor of. If your zakat was due on a certain date, and you wanted to hold it for another date down the road, and for whatever reason that zakat got lost or destroyed, or the stock market went down, you owe the amount that was due. Yes. No, siblings are eligible. Yeah, your children and your parents or your grandparents, right, are not eligible. People pretty much in your direct lineage, right? Anyone horizontal, brothers and sisters, siblings, like you're not responsible for them, you can pay them your zakah. Yeah. Has to be Muslim. Yes, has to be Muslim, right? Yeah. Okay. Other considerations. I know we're getting close. What time is the adhan? Where are we? Oh, 7:30 now? Okay. You don't have to tell people if you're giving them that money is zakah. What is it? 7:20. That's iqamah. Oh. Yeah, 7:30, that time is the iqamah time, right? Yeah. 20, yeah. Okay, we'll wrap it up at 15 so we can put the chairs away. You don't have to tell the person the money is from zakah because people have dignity and honor. And many people, if you go and say, you know, I love you, I know you're broke, here's some money, right? That doesn't feel good, right? And so you can simply give them a gift in any way, and they don't have to know it's zakah at all, right? In any way that you can get them that money is fine. Number two, it can be given incrementally if necessary. If you know somebody is not good with money, or they have a certain need. This person I know cannot pay their rent for the next few months, right? I know they can't pay some of their bills for the next few months. I will step in every month and I'll pay that. So I've earmarked it, but I'm paying it off over time. And that's in the case that if you worry that if you gave somebody right now $5,000 as zakat, they're just going to end up using it in ways that are not optimal, right? Then you don't do that. Number three, the person who's been given the zakat must own and control that zakat as well. So of course, if they ask you to pay their rent, that's totally fine, right? But it's not like with strings attached. The person is the owner of zakat. It's not the institution, right? Which is why you don't give money typically to institutions unless those people are giving it, unless the institution is giving it to people, right? It doesn't go for bricks and for other types of facilities, right? Yes, sister? You can give sadaqah to them, of course. Yeah, sadaqah can go to anybody, anytime, any case. Non-Muslims, totally fine, yes. And then do not give zakah to able-bodied people who don't want to work. This also happens much more than you imagine. I've dealt with many cases like this. People will say, I got laid off. I'm worth $150,000 on the market. I'm only being offered like 120 on the jobs. I keep turning them down. I need zakah money to pay my rent. Nope, sorry. You know, you go bag groceries, do whatever you need to do. You do everything in your possibility. When you put your full effort, whatever is lacking, we'll help you and take care of, right? So we don't want to incentivize people to be like that. I'm going to wrap up very quick. So a couple things. I had a slide it's nice to share. But I've run numbers over the years to kind of begin to project how much zakah we could actually generate in Orange County. And I can show you the slide later or email it to you all. Based on some projections I have made, we easily can generate, so if you had 250 people who had $100,000 of zakah money, then they would generate $625,000 in zakah. If you had a couple millionaires, if you had 100 millionaires, just had $1 million, they would make $2.5 million of zakah. If you had 5 people who had $50 million, which I know we have, because when I've given presentations, people in the room said, the people in this room make more money than what you're putting on your slide. Okay. So here I've calculated at least about $25 million of zakah in Orange County. Do you think there'd be one poor Muslim if we had $25 million coming into zakah? There wouldn't be a poor Muslim anywhere around us, right? So even locally, forget globally and nationally and all, like just think about what you could do in your community. We could eradicate poverty of Muslims in our locality if we were strategic and did these things properly. So that's part 2. I'm gonna end. I'm gonna quickly have 3 minutes for my last portion. This is like normally 2 hours. This is condensed. Actually, it's 2.5 hours. So this is a very fast version. Okay, last few things. Now it's okay, it's a lot of information. Let's get down to the nuts and bolts. So how do you calculate your zakah? You calculate all your zakatable assets. My money, my cash, my 401k, my business, my agriculture, whatever it is, right? Who cares? I'm going to take all of that and calculate it. I'm going to subtract it from the loans that I have taken out in life. But let's figure out what type of loans. There's 2 types of loans. There's what we call short-term debt, which is typically debt that's less than a year. So short-term debt is like if I went to a brother and I said, hey, can I borrow some money? I'll pay you back like within this year. If that is the case, I can subtract all of that money because it's due in the same year, just like my zakah is due in that year, right? Long-term debt are things that are in either perpetuity or they're greater than a year. So my mortgage is over 30 years or 15 years, or my rent is in perpetuity. It's just going to go on and on and on. My car payments are over 60 months or 72 months. My student loans are over 5 years. These are all long-term things. In that circumstance, you subtract your upcoming installment only. If that is like pending like very soon. It's like, oh, I got my zakah due, but guess what? Next week, I've been using all my electricity. I've already used it. I owe someone for that, right? Or I owe my upcoming car payment for some of these things. The scholars say you are allowed to subtract 1 month or 1 installment essentially if you want to. My general opinion is just whatever is due that day, just deal with whatever you have that day. Sometimes it ends up being you paid rent yesterday, right? And so now you've already deducted that rent, right? Or your bills. Like this whole forecasting, like just, it doesn't, people think it's a lot of money. It's not a lot. So your rent, it was like a couple $1,000s. What is 2.5% of that couple $1,000s, right? Talking about $50 maybe, right? $75 maybe. So these type of little like subtractions you could do, but they don't make a big impact on your zakat anyway, but you're allowed to. Rules regarding debts that are owed to you. So someone owes you money. The general rule is that so when the likelihood of receiving that money is high, like someone says, I'm going to pay you back this year. And you're like, look, I know he's going to pay me back this year. Or even he says to you, like, I got the money, next time I see you, I'll give it to you, right? Okay, I know I'm going to get that money. I'm behaving in life like I have that money. Then you can add that into your zakatable assets because it's like you functionally have it. If you do not have it, or you do not expect it back, or you cannot claim it anytime soon, then you do not add that to your zakatable assets. So if you give someone a loan, and you say, pay me back when you can pay it back, and the person cannot pay it back, or it's due, but they're unable to pay it, they say, I need another like 6 months, or it's again just dead debt, right? Someone owed you, and it's just kind of, they're insolvent in this case, right? If you end up getting money in the future, you add it to your future assets, but you don't have to back pay on that, right? Okay, so let me quickly go through some scenarios, and we're going to end with this. I know we're at our time. So imagine somebody had $25,000, let's say the first of Ramadan, right? And you say, okay, they have got the nisab. Well, now we say, well, what happens throughout the end of the year? This person bought a car for $22,000. Well, now they only have $3,000. But we say, look, don't worry. Don't start from scratch. Just wait until the end of the year. So let's say by the first of Ramadan, again, of the next year, they were down to $3,000 in the middle of the year. But by the end of the year, they're back to $15,000. We say, okay, alhamdulillah, they have the nisab, the hawl is passed, they still have it. But let's check their debts. And it turns out they have a debt of $5,000 to somebody. It's short term. You know, maybe part of that car that they purchased or something like that, or home repairs, $5,000 loan. So they owed $15,000 in zakah, but they have a debt of $5,000. They can subtract that. Now they owe zakah on $10,000, so they only owe $250. It's very, very simple, right? Scenario number 2. Imagine somebody had, in this case, they had $75,000. So of course they're at the nisab. But in the middle of the year, they bought a home for $500,000. No, there's no $500,000 houses anymore. $1 million house, right? And their monthly payment, let's say whatever it is, like let's say mortgage is this is an old slide, so the numbers should be updated. $2,500 a month, let's say their mortgage doesn't exist, right? So they put a down payment of $50,000. So you bought a home, you had $75,000, you put $50,000 down, now you have $25,000, right? First of Ramadan comes, you're like, okay, I have $25,000, but my rent is due next week. Okay, fine. You can subtract your $2,500, which puts you at $22,500, 2.5%, $562.50. Not too complicated, right? Got it. Last example, and we're done. Somebody had $3,000 in the first of Ramadan, no nisab. I don't start calculating, nothing happens. 6 months later, someone gives me $3,000. Now I have $6,000. Okay, now I start calculating from the middle of the year. Let's say it's the 15th of Muharram. Now I wait the whole year. A year passes, and now I have $10,000. That looks good. Okay, $10,000. But guess what? I owe $2,500 on my student loans, and I owe rent next week, $1,500. Wait, I also had a short-term loan for someone for a few $1,000s. $10,000 minus $2,500 minus $2,000 versus that. Oh, I only have $3,000 in true assets at the end of the day. So he doesn't actually have the nisab. He doesn't actually pay any zakah in this circumstance, right? But this is where you have to sit down, do your accounting, right? Have your spreadsheets. These are my assets. These are my liabilities. This is short term. This is long term. Calculate all of it out. Figure out your day every year. Kind of have your alarm on your phone. Calculate your zakah. Pay your zakah. Inshallah, you're good to go. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to mix amongst those who pay our zakah, and we ask Allah to make it a means of rewards for us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to serve those who are in need, to have love for those who are in need, and we ask Allah to put barakah in our wealth. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun, wa salamun ala al-mursaleen, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Jazakumullah khair for your patience. I know we went a little bit over. Inshallah, we'll pray in adhan in a minute. Break your fast, and we'll talk soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. Yes, here's what I need. I need emails. Someone can, here, take my email and just send me an email. And I'll, yeah.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
قل لا إله إلا الله. استقيموا واعتدلوا. الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بل يريد كل امرئ منهم أن يؤتى صحفا منشرة. كلا بل لا يخافون الآخرة. كلا إنه تذكرة فمن شاء ذكره. وما يذكرون إلا أن يشاء الله. هو أهل التقوى وأهل المغفرة. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.